Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime, doing the show on the day of the game for once for reasons that are probably clear if you haven't been living under a rock over the last 12 or 24 hours or so. As you probably know, Aston Villa have had a little bit of a crisis. They've had a COVID outbreak at their training ground, which means they've had to shut it. All of their first team players and coaching staff are in isolation, and as a result, there was a big hoo-ha yesterday about exactly what was going to happen with this game. And at one point, around about the same time that I was about to record the pre-match video yesterday, it actually looked a lot like the game was just not going to go ahead at all, and Liverpool were probably going to be given a bye into the second round because of the fact that if the game weren't to be played this weekend, because of particularly Aston Villa's fixture list, there is no slot where this game could have been played up until the fourth round. They are playing weekend, midweek, every single week. Liverpool do have one slot available, but unfortunately for Villa, that's taken up by the City game that was meant to be played at the start of the season that couldn't be played because City had European commitments, yada, 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 etc, etc, etc. Basically, the game had to be played this weekend or it couldn't be played at all. So to avoid it being called off, Aston Villa are pulling a move that was probably a little bit familiar to us as Liverpool fans, where they are not going to play any first team players. They're also not going to use any first team coaching staff, and they are instead going to field the Resis, basically. And as I said, we as Liverpool fans are very familiar with that. It happened twice last season, including, of course, in a cup tie against Aston Villa. So this is retribution in a way, I guess, for when they went out and just mercilessly pummeled our under-23s, although anyone who did watch that game will be willing to attest to the fact that Liverpool weren't awful in that match. I thought we gave them a decent game, and it just so happened that Aston Villa basically scored with every single attack. I think at one point they were 4-0 up, having had 3 shots on target, I think it was, or 3 shots in general, because one of the goals was an own goal from a cross or something ridiculous like that. But either way, the game is going to go ahead, but it's maybe not quite the game that we were expecting it to be going into it. I think there was a big question going into it of whether Villa were going to play their first team and try and prioritise a cup run, or whether they'd look to maintain their solid position in the league that they've managed to keep going so far by prioritising that and playing the reserves in the cup. That's all gone completely out the window. They're going to play their reserves, and the question now is, do Liverpool do the same? Because I think going into the game yesterday, I was thinking, well, we're probably going to rotate a lot because of the fixture congestion. It's understandable that Jurgen Klopp, despite the fact that after this game, we've got a 9-day break until the home game against Manchester United, there are a lot of players who are probably getting close to that red zone where they're going to start risking injuries. And you only have to look back to the game against Midfield for evidence of what happens if you do have a kind of, not a dead rubber, of course, this isn't a dead rubber like the Midfield game was, but a game that's not top priority, and you play some of your first team stars in it and they get injured, a la Diogo Jota, and then suddenly you find yourself in a very difficult situation a few weeks later when your entire front three is misfiring, as Liverpool's is at the moment. So understandably, I think we were probably not going to play the first team players in this game, but now the situation has changed. Given players like Salah and Mane just haven't got their shooting boots on at the moment and could probably do with a little bit of target practice, maybe a game against basically an under-18 side with no top-level professional experience whatsoever might be a good opportunity for both of them to get themselves back on track. And also bearing in mind, Liverpool tend to not play well after a break, coming off of international breaks or winter breaks, or even around this part of the season where we do tend to seem to get this kind of draw where we get the Friday FA Cup game and then we play the later Premier League game the next weekend and we get like a 9 or 10 day gap. I think that has happened a few times for Liverpool in the past. So I think with that in mind, we tend not to play well after those breaks, and therefore I think it might actually benefit our players in a sort of roundabout way to get them on the pitch in this game just to maintain a little bit of rhythm. Although then again, when the next game's in 9 days, whatever rhythm they do gain from this Villa game probably isn't going to have too much of an effect, next weekend against Manchester United. But it's certainly something for Jurgen Klopp to consider. And as I said, with the first team players not playing at their best at the moment, I can see why he might want to throw them in for this match. Also, looking back to a few seasons ago, some of you may remember when we lost to Burnley away from home 2-0 right at the start of the season. It was the second Premier League game of the campaign. We then had a cup tie away to Burton a few days later, and Jurgen basically played the entire first team as if to say, you weren't good enough at the weekend, go out and show me that you've learned from from your mistakes and you've improved, and they went and won 5-0. So there's maybe an argument that Jurgen Klopp does a similar thing there as well. But in terms of team news and the players that are actually going to be available for this game, Naby Keita, Jurgen Klopp said in his press conference, is close but will not be available for this game. So hopefully that injury was just a small issue that's not going to carry on for any more weeks after this, and he could be available for the game against Manchester United. Joel Matip also not obviously going to be available for this game. I don't think any of us expected him to be a possible participant in this match, but Jurgen said he will be assessed ahead of the game against Manchester United, which is a huge boost. And of course, we're all crossing our fingers and touching wood and doing everything else we possibly can to hope and pray that he is going to be available for that game, because God knows we need him. But in the meantime, you know, regardless of if he was fit, he was never going to play in this game, but it's good to have a positive update on him at least. And he also gave us a little bit of an update on Diogo Jota. Not a great one, unfortunately. Said that his knee is still in a brace, so he's still a few weeks off of full team training at the very least, which means you can probably say a month basically until we can expect him to have any chance of being fielded for the first team. So the good news is he's on the way back. He's closer to his return than he was at the start of the injury. But the bad news is we're not going to see him anytime soon, which is, of course, a little bit of a shame given the form he was in earlier on in the season. But as for the team that I think Liverpool are actually going to field for this game, I think we see the return of Caoimhin Kelleher in goal for this game, which I'm excited for because he put in some fantastic performances earlier on in the season. I doubt Adrian plays in this one because Kelleher does seem to have taken his role as the second choice goalkeeper, and the Adrian ship's kind of sailed now, isn't it? You don't need to be giving him game time. He's probably going to move on in the summer, whereas it does feel like Kelleher might have a future at the club, and therefore you want to get him on the pitch as much as you possibly can without it adversely affecting the team. And therefore, when we are going to rotate goalies for cup competitions, I think he's a shoo-in for that number one shirt for this game. So I think Kelleher is between the sticks. Ahead of him, you don't play Fabinho under any circumstances, I don't think, because we cannot afford an injury to him. I also, like I said, Matip was never going to play in this game anyway. I think it was always going to be Nat Phillips and Reece Williams as the centre-halves. Neither of them have shown any tendency to be injury-prone so far, fingers crossed. So hopefully they put in a good performance in this game. Either side of them, I think we'll see more rotation, with Nico Williams coming in at right-back and Kostas Tsimikas coming in at left-back. We haven't really seen enough of Tsimikas so far this season, so hopefully we can get a good performance out of him. I think, understandably, he hasn't played much for the first team in Premier League or Champions League games because Robbo's been phenomenal, to be fair, but he's certainly got a chance to stake a claim for a bit more of a rotational role, especially with a heavy set of fixtures coming up. And the same goes for Nico Williams as well. Jurgen Klopp did say in his press conference yesterday that he essentially confirmed for the first time what had been rumoured for a while, that Trent had COVID in pre-season, and also suggested that he's having the long COVID effects that have been affecting some players. You look at Newcastle as well, who've got 2 players that are still out from when they had their coronavirus outbreak. And that kind of makes sense because it does look like Trent has not quite been at it a lot of the time this season. So there's maybe an argument that you get him into this game to play himself into form and to put a bit more experience across that back line. But as I said, with the games coming thick and fast as this season goes on, especially towards the end of this month, we need to give Nico Williams a bit more experience and a bit more game time to build up his sharpness, because it would be good to be able to call on him in those games later on in January. And then in front of that defence, I think we go with Gini Wijnaldum as the base of the midfield, and then Oxlade-Chamberlain and Jones either side of him. If you basically presume that Liverpool's first choice midfield at the moment is Henderson, Gini and Thiago, you certainly don't want all 3 of them starting in this game, but I do think we can afford, given that we've got a bit more of a wealth of opportunities in midfield, options in midfield now, we can afford to put at least one first choice midfielder in there, because say, God forbid, Gini gets injured, we've now got people like Jones, like Milner as well, like Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita when he comes back, who can come in to fill the void in midfield, and we maybe didn't have that about a month ago. And of course, the situation could all change. We've got to be very careful. But I think for now, at least, we've at least got the room to rotate in midfield while also giving some time to the more experienced first-team players. So I think Gini is the anchor there. Also because outside of Gini and Henderson, and obviously Fabinho as well, we haven't really got any number 6 kind of players. A lot of people suggest that maybe Milner could play there. I've never really liked him as a defensive midfielder, to be perfectly honest. Certainly not as a single one, maybe in like a double pivot in a 4-2-3-1. But when there's 3 of them, he's not best when he's the most deep-lying one. We've seen Oxlade-Chamberlain do it, I think, to varying degrees of success, but I think Gini has experience there and has shown that he's more than capable of playing that role. And then, of course, Oxlade-Chamberlain and Jones, both of them not had too much game time over the last couple of weeks and have both shown themselves to be very effective and creative going forward, which, given the fact we're going to be playing a pretty weak Aston Villa side, is probably what we're going to need. And then in front of them, I know I said I'd quite like to see some target practice given to the first choice front three. I think from the start, it would also be nice to give some opportunities to the fringe players. Given the front three's been misfiring as well, it will be good to see what Minamino's got in his locker. I think he'll start. What Shaqiri's got in his locker as well, I think he'll start. He didn't play that well when he came off the bench against Southampton, but I think he deserves another opportunity. And then, listen, while Origi's still here, you may as well use him. And listen, I think later on in the game, maybe even at half-time, you can think about bringing Salah on, Mane on, Firmino on to help themselves play themselves back into a bit more form and a bit more rhythm than what we've seen over the last few games, especially because in the second half, you'd expect the Villa team to tire a little bit, and therefore the game might not be played at such a high intensity, and therefore you reduce the risk of injury to key players. But from the start, I would quite like to see a little bit of rotation. And like I said, given the fact that the front three isn't playing brilliantly at the moment, if Minamino scores a hat-trick and plays a blinder, then he's played himself into contention, I think, to at least be considered in the game against Man United. And likewise goes for Origi and Shaqiri as well. So taking just a quick look at Aston Villa then, because I'm sure you guys will forgive me for not knowing too much about the players they're probably going to play. The fact of the matter is, it's not their first team. We know that now. There's not going to be any Jack Grealish, any Ollie Watkins. Ross Barkley was injured anyway, but he's not going to be there. Tyrone Mings may have been suspended, but he's certainly not going to be there. None of those lads are going to be involved. And it's not even the reserves. It's not even the rotational players that are on the bench at the weekend in the Premier League, or the players that they might have considered bringing into this side for this game. It's the kids. And we as Liverpool fans have seen firsthand what happens when it's the actual kids, when it's not Origi and Minamino and James Milner and Curtis Jones, when it's actually, from our perspective, people like Leighton Clarkson and Elijah Dixon-Bonner, I think his name is, Morgan Boys, you know, lads that we'd never even heard of until they take to the pitch at the start of the game. So for Villa, and it's the same goes for the coaching staff as well, you know, John Terry and Dean Smith. Is it Dean Smith, their manager? I've completely forgotten. It's quite a bland name, but I think it is Dean Smith, the Villa manager. They're not going to be available either, and I don't think they're going to be doing it via Zoom. They're very much going to adopt the Liverpool approach of, if you're playing the under-23s players, then you use the coaching staff as well, which makes sense, obviously, both on a COVID level, they've got to isolate as well, but also on a chemistry level, you know, those players have worked with that set of staff. So it's not going to be a great Villa side, and there's every chance that they get absolutely walloped. I think as Liverpool fans, we can now go into this game feeling a lot more relaxed than I think we would have done, looking at it and thinking it gives us more of a chance of a cup run. It's also interesting that on Monday night they're doing the draw for the 4th and the 5th rounds, which will give Liverpool a very clear idea of how seriously they can take this competition. Because listen, if we get a League 2 team in the 4th round and we're guaranteed like one of a League 1 or League 2 team in the 5th round, that takes you through to the quarterfinals if you beat them, and then you can start thinking about actually treating this as a proper piece of silverware. And like I said, tonight's game should hopefully be a bit of a routine win for Liverpool, but when we played Villa last season in the Cups and we played the kids, we weren't writing it off at all. We were all dreaming of an incredible game where the kids would be all right and they'd come up trumps and they'd get a win. And we saw firsthand them actually do it later on in the season against Shrewsbury as well. So there are no guarantees in football whatsoever. But one thing's for sure, we can really look forward to this game now and at least hope and probably expect that we are going to see a really good performance and finally some goals from this Liverpool side. So that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, as always, you know what to do. Hit the like button down there. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter. And I'll be back this evening after we've hopefully tonked Villa. Until then, bye for now.